Okay, so what you're here for, how to build in GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks. I've had quite a lot of interest in this. I know a lot of people are using page builders these days, and that's fine. But I want to explain how I use Generate and GenerateBlocks and why as well. It gives you an alternate stack, software stack. Okay, so the big question, why do you choose it? So my stack is GeneratePress Premium, so that's the paid version, and GenerateBlocks Pro, so they're both paid versions, so not the free version. So the main reason I use this stack is it is super fast, it is super lightweight, it's very stable, and it's really good support. Now, I know I'm not going to name page builders, but there's certain page builders where when they release, they get a lot of people saying, oh, it's broken my website. I've never had that on GeneratePress. They do extensive testing. And again, there's some page builders where people try and access the support, and it's very lacking. GeneratePress have support there 24/7. So you log into the support, ask the forum, do a chat, and they're right there on top of it. So never had a problem with those two. It's fast because it's a very lightweight theme. There's not a lot to it, and you'll see through the slides. But it's getting top scores on Google. So if you just install GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks, and you're getting the top scores because it's not loading very much in at all. This might appeal to some people. I don't particularly use this, but it does have a starter sites library. I know a lot of these page builder type things have. What I find this useful for is if I get a client and they've maybe not engaged in a designer and they're still unclear about what they want, I say, well, have a look through these things and get an idea. Okay, so I never take them, but it gives them an idea of what can be built using the stack, which is pretty much anything. So that's what I use it for, but I know a lot of people like these starter libraries. So if you are considering the stack, you've got, I don't know, probably about 50, 60, maybe 100. I think there's actually 200 different site kits in there that you can start from. So it gives you a start to 10. It has a pattern library as well. So GeneratePress is different from, say, Divi or Oxygen, Elementor, and Beaver Builder in that it's block-based. Okay. So Elementor and Beaver Builder are the two big ones out there. They've got their own components, their own widgets, and you drag them on top. GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks is the block editor, block-based. And that's one reason it makes it super fast. So it has a pattern library. If you don't know what patterns are, they're basically just a group of blocks stuck together. But it's great because they have all these, I think, again, there's over 200 in the library. So it's worthwhile looking through these if you're designing a site, just to make sure that you're not recreating stuff from scratch. So it's got heaps of stuff there. It's got good call to action. There's pricing plans. They've got the query loop patterns as well. So that's you when you're bringing in posts or custom post types or products. It builds it all for you. So definitely have a look through the pattern library. It's really useful and saves a lot of time. Another reason I like GeneratePress is it has dynamic data binding. It has, you can bring down a headline and then you can set it to a post title, or you can bring in the post content, author name, author meta, depending on the context. But that's all built in. It's all the dynamic stuff, which is really, really good. I love that. So this is just some of the stuff that you can bring in. There's a whole lot more, and it depends on what context you're bringing the data in. So obviously, if you're working with maybe a user or an author post, then you can get all the author stuff. If you're working with posts, you can get this sort of stuff in. And similarly with products, like WooCommerce, you can bring in that particular type of metadata that's associated with products. So really easy to embed dynamic data. There are heaps of styling controls. Now, I don't know how much you've used blocks or created websites with blocks, but when you go to the styling of a default WordPress block, there's not a lot of options you have there. It's very, very basic. You might be able to change the color. You might be able to change the size from like small to large. But as far as actual styling stuff, there's not a lot of options with the built-in WordPress. This is where GeneratePress comes in. You have a shitload of styling options. Border, typography, spacing. You can bring in icons for stuff. I mean, there's a whole lot of panel down the side. So that's one of the reasons I love GeneratePress, is because I can style anything any way I want to do that, which you just can't do with the built-in editor. So that was GeneratePress. I also use GenerateBlocks, it's the same company. They add these 6 blocks. And you think, well, I'm paying $99 a year. Why do I just need these 6 blocks? But you can build any website with just this combination of blocks. The developer of GeneratePress, he basically distilled everything down and said, what do I need structurally to build web pages? And this is it. A container, some bit of text, a button, some images, a grid to display stuff, and a query to get the data out. And that's it. That's all you need. And I've built probably about 50 websites using GenerateBlocks and GeneratePress now. And nobody would even know that it wasn't built in a page builder. So as well as those 6 core blocks, they add a few extra things in. So again, you've got the pattern library, but it brings in accordions and tabs as like an extra thing. But some of the things I like in here is global styles. And I'll talk about that in a little bit later. You have effects, so very simple CSS-based animation effects, so you're not losing out on that either. And device visibility as well, so you can see mobile, tablet, and full desktop. Okay, so when not and when to use this particular stack. And this is through trial and error, I have found. So when to use it is when you need speed. So if you're using page builders, like any of the big page builders, they're loading a lot of extra assets because they've got their own widgets in there. So loading in CSS files, they're loading in images, they're loading in JavaScript files from all there. So out the start, it's heavy. It's heavy. Now, I know a lot of them have done a lot of work to try and load in styles and assets just when they need it. But still, they're a larger, heavier plugin than this one. So if you're looking for speed, you can't get much speedier than the WordPress block editor. So GeneratePress is one of the fastest loading themes you can get. But what I find is the concept of how GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks is built and how you use them, it's a bit of a learning curve. It's great once you get your brain around how it works, but it is a higher learning curve. So generally, you're looking for a more tech-savvy client to run that, because they've got to understand how the pages are being built. Steph?
How does it differ from the native block editor in WordPress? Or is it using the same feature?
It's used the same features, but extended. So it's like the normal WordPress blocks, but on steroids. So I'll show you some of the options later on. When not to use it is when you've got a really technophobic client. So when you're developing client websites, sometimes you'll get mums and dads, you'll get grandma and granddads, running a business. If they're not technically understanding how the whole framework works, it's going to be difficult for them to manage a website on this. This is where you're probably going to consider going down a traditional page builder like Elementor or Divi or Beaver Builder. So if they don't really understand the concept of how the layout is built, then page builder is probably going to be easier for them in the long run. Example sites, my one, of course. So mywillbrown.com is completely built in GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks. But if you go to their own website as well, and they've got case studies on there, there's hundreds of websites that have been built on that, and you wouldn't know anything different. So where to start? So when you've loaded in GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks, the best place to start is a child theme. So you don't have to have a child theme, but if you don't start with a child theme and you go down development and you decide you actually need a child theme because you want to change some stuff in code, it's more difficult to implement it afterwards than it is at the beginning. So even if you're not using it, it's always good practice to start with a child theme, and you can download that from the GeneratePress website. Next thing is you're jumping into the customizer. Now, I love doing this first of all. The customizer kind of replicates lots of stuff across the entire website. So rather than going to individual settings, I jump in the customizer first. You'll see that GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks have several different areas, depends on what you switch on in the customizer. But if you're changing the customizer stuff, then you know that's going to replicate throughout the entire site. So it's always my first visit. There's 3 by default with GeneratePress. There's layout, there's colors, and there's typography. So if you can set your baseline stuff in here, then you don't need to worry about afterwards going back and kind of retrofitting it all done. Of course, you can override settings in CSS, for things like typography and layout. But I like to set it all here first, just so it's up and running for there. Here's the one for layout. So probably one of the most important ones is you want to define the width of your website. So I generally do 1960 or 1280 or something like that nowadays. Again, you can override this, but it's just easier to set up the default. So when you're working within the editor, it's all just how you want it set up. So here's the colors. You've got heaps of options here. So you can choose your global template, your color template, and then you can apply that to anything you need. And it's just going to mean that when you're in the editor, it's all set nicely for your brand colors. Typography as well. You have the choice now to not load the Google Fonts API. So you can use the WordPress local embed fonts, and then you just use the name, and it will just bring that up as well. I had a client, and they were not using GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks, but they were saying, why is my website slow? So I ran it through GTmetrix. I noticed it was loading Google Fonts API from a block that they didn't use on their website 27 times on 27 downloads on each homepage refresh. So yeah, it's a significant, makes things go a lot faster if you're not using external APIs. Okay, so here's the stack. So WordPress at the bottom, GeneratePress theme, then the child theme, and then the GenerateBlocks. It's useful to understand that when you're talking about the stylings and the customizer and stylings, that this is the stack that it generates. So you can go into GeneratePress and set up the customizer. Then when you install GenerateBlocks, it's got its own separate styling. So that's the kind of stack it uses. A bit difficult to get your head around sometimes, but once you have it all set up, it just works nicely. But if you want to override things, if you tend not to go into the Generate child theme, have a look at GenerateBlocks first, and then it kind of goes down the way. Global styles. This is a new thing that they've added. It's really useful. So you have the chance now to, for example, if you're creating a page, if you select on a particular element, and it could be any element, you now get the choice to add a global style. So you give it a name, and then, oh, have I got this? Yeah, so you give it a name. So this is the button. I'm calling it orange button. Then I'll ask you what type of global styles do you want. So you can start with a blank one. You can clone an existing one. I'm saying copy the existing block style. So I've got a orange button here. It's going to copy all the styles down there. And then it takes you into the new style editor. So you define all the styles there. This is because of buttons, so it's got main, it's got hover, it's got more things like action. For the layout, you can define the style for everything. So mobile, tablet, and desktop, that's the first little one there. And you can specify each individual one with different layouts. So you can actually style everything all the way down from tablet to mobile using this. So what you do is you'd choose your global styles. So that's your sizing, your layout, your fonts, all your colors and things, and then you save it as a global style. So here we go. So it's saved that as a .orange button. And you can see within the global styles that it's saved it there. That's a separate place that you can manage those styles. But next time you go to a button, then rather than having to set all the layouts or worry about CSS, you just choose that style and it applies it to whatever button it means. So if you're doing a global style-based approach, then it's less work for you, because just say you present that site to the client and they say, well, actually, I don't want the button to be orange. We want it to be a little bit more browner. Then you just come to the global style, you change that, and it reflects it through the entire site. So it's a bit similar approach of doing style sheets. You could do it manually in a style sheet, but this is more visual. It keeps it all together within this. I think there's another page builder, possibly Breakdance, that does a similar approach. So you build with global styles, And you can do the styling to anything. So you can do it to a button, you can do it to a container, you can do it to a block pattern. So at any level, you can apply a global style. So it's really, really useful if you're building components within the website. You can apply a style and then just override that, and it reflects through the entire website. So I'm loving this just now. I stylize everything. Okay, so modules. This is where the power of GeneratePress really comes into its own. So if you go into the settings of GeneratePress, you've got lots of different what they call modules. It's just a bank of features that they like. I generally don't tend to use most of them. I might use the blog if I'm developing a blog system, but a lot of them are just kind of handy features. So example, a copyright, I'll add a copyright message to the bottom, but I don't use that. What I do use all the time is the elements, though. The elements is like the power behind GeneratePress. So I enable that, and you get a new setting in the dashboard called elements. And this is where the real power, I think, of GeneratePress. So an element can be a hook, it can be a bit of custom code, or it can be a template. So it's very, very powerful. And again, this is why probably tech-savvy people get GeneratePress and not technophobic people. So an example here. I've got my footer, okay? So within element, you can choose the type of the element, and you can choose its location as well, in a similar way that you do with Elementor or Beaver Builder. So if I have a look along the footer, it's my global footer, and you can see that location is entire site. So it's going to be site-wide. And the type of footer is a block and a hook. So I'm actually designing a block, so it lets me get into the block editor, and it allows me to assign that output to a particular hook. And again, here's a different type. This one is just a hook, so it doesn't give me the block designer. But this is my Google tag script. So while I do like little code plugin snippets, you can just use this for your code as well. So what I'm doing now, I'm placing that in the WP head, which is right above where it needs to go. Templates, you can do templates. So for example, here's the blog post article. So that is a type block, so I'm getting the block editor, but it's a template. So it's going to override all the blog posts. That's your way that you'd set a particular template. In the same way as you would do in Elementor or Beaver, you go, a single post. This is how I want to template it, design it, and then when you see a post, all the data merges in with the design. So this is the bit where people kind of go, I don't really understand. It takes a bit of a while to get around understanding elements, but super powerful. So when you choose an element, you get these options. You have a block editor, you can have a hook, a layout, or header. When you choose the element type, there's lots of different things you can choose there. So you can override the loop template, for example. You can apply it to the post navigation, just the navigation systems. You can put it into a search modal, so pop-up. So there's lots of different options that it will apply. And depending on what you choose, then the editor will have different options in the back end when you're designing it. And pretty much every hook is available. You can just go up and down. So here's an example of the footer. So I've got the list view here. You can see when you're creating stuff in GeneratePress, it all starts with a container. Container is your main, what you call div. Yeah, and you put everything in a container. In the container, you can control where all that stuff is and move it up and down. That's your kind of main navigation element. So within the container here, I've got just a navigation block, which is a WordPress default block. So it just grabbed a menu item, and those little menu items there. And then I've got, and this is a GeneratePress headline option. I'll show you that in a minute. That's really simple. So this is me within the element, and I've got the block editor. So that's the name, footer, the post title. And then I've just got a bit of text in there and the menu for there. And because it's an element, I get to set where it goes. So it's a block element. I want it to go out in a hook, and then the hook is on the footer, and I can get a priority or stuff up and down. So I could have chosen, I think there's a footer. Yeah, I could have chosen site footer, and it would just output it there. But I wanted to be very specific because I've actually got other things that come before and after the footer. So I wanted to make sure I wanted to go exactly where that hook was outputting it. So containers, that's your kind of core starter. Here's my website, and here's a list view of the top half above the fold. The home is a post title, and within this post, I've said don't output the post title, so that won't show. So then I've got a header, container with a header, so that's separate, so I can have it in there. And then I've got a container with a grid, and the grid has 2 containers inside, and that's this bit here with a picture of me. And then again, you can see everything's just container, 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 container. And it's a similar way to developing in the block editor, where you've got, you're stacking stuff up and down in there. But the container just gives you that control to group all those elements together. So it's one of the core parts of GeneratePress. So when you're in the container block, you've got these different options. It's flex by default now, but you can choose a particular type that you want. So if you want an inline block or inline flex, you've got the flexibility to choose exactly what type it is. You can choose all the blocks inside as well, the different orientation for that. You've got your flex child, so you can have it expand or not. And this is what you get with GeneratePress that you don't get with the normal editor, all these different types of settings. So spacing, borders, backgrounds, shape dynamic data, there's conditional blocks as well. And the advanced, we can apply CSS classes to it as well. So in here, you can see this, I've just highlighted that particular container, and you can see its output there. It's just a div. So the entry content is beginning, and then this one line, you can see it's got a GB container, and yeah. So that's how it splits it down. If you look at the code, it's really, really clean. You've got your container as a div, and everything underneath. So you've not got multiple divs and containers that you do get with a lot of other page builders, because they have to support all these different types of widgets and stuff. This is just a simple, you've got a container, it's a single div. So your code is really nice and clean, and it's easy for Google to grab that and get the content out of that. And less code is faster websites. So one of the other core parts is the headline. So you might have seen that I'm using this H quite a lot in here. And the reason I use that is because it's not just a heading. So it can be a H1 down to H6, but it can also be a paragraph, and it can also be a div. And the reason I use this is because you get all that styling with it, which you don't get with the Gutenberg editor. If you choose header or paragraph with Gutenberg editor, then those blocks just have very limited styling. I think you can choose like the size, big or small. You might be able to choose a color. But with using this block in GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks, you get all this styling, and you can assign it to a global class as well. So much more flexibility in the way that you style your options when building with this stack. Grid is another core component for here. So I've extracted that bit from my page, and you can see here they've got their container with a grid, and the grid contains these 2 containers, which is not 50-50. And within those, I've got some text, which again, I'm using the headline rather than the paragraph. And I've got some buttons and one for the image on the side. So here's the grid option. So the grid element itself, you can change the horizontal and vertical gap. There's no grid in the WordPress default block editor, so it's just columns. So this is useful. You can choose the alignment and stuff, but again, you get all the different types of styling that you want from here. So I've highlighted the first container. So within the grid, and then the containers within the grid. So the first one is set to 66. You've got these nice handy options. So you can do 25, which is obviously 4 across. You can do 33, which is 3. But you can really sort of stylize it with any settings you need. And again, all these heaps of settings that you don't get within the WordPress editor. It comes with a query loop as well. So query loop is for getting out post data or product data or any custom post type data out. It runs in a similar way, works in a similar way to the default Gutenberg query loop, but again, it's a bit on steroids. So you do get to choose a particular layout. There's maybe not as many as the default WordPress loop block, but there's enough, or you can start a blank one and start designing your own. So once you choose an option, it will choose a grid for you, and then it creates a container. It locks that because it wants to keep the stuff in place, but then it gives you the ability to edit the content within that. So in this one's just very simple. It's for the posts. It's create a featured image with a dynamic data that's set to the featured image. Then you've got the post title, post date, and post excerpt as well. But then you're now free to design that, move it up and down, add extra stuff if you want to do post meta or stuff like that. So really, really super easy. And again, at each stage, container, the grid, and the post template, you've got all your template and style guides as well, which you don't have in the Gutenberg one. So that's the Gutenberg one. So that's the standard query loop that comes out. And it's very similar in the way it groups it together. But if you click on each of these elements, you get no styling at all. So you have to go back to CSS and manually deal your CSS. But some people might like, but I find it just a pain. I'd rather create a generate blocks grid and query loop and apply global style. And then if I don't like that, I can go back here and just change it, and it replicates it all out for those. So quite a difference there, the generate blocks and just the normal Gutenberg one. There's hardly any options there at all. Here is an action. So down further on the page, I've got my latest blog post. Everyone has that on their website. So you can see exactly how it's working here. So the query loop with the grid, and then the post template, and applies to that. But the nice thing about this is if I do a global class and I don't like that particular styling, then I just change the class and it just replicates that on this front page, on the blog archive, anywhere else I've got this query loop applying.